Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ben, and this is the PRS SE CE 24 Satin. Let's get into it. Before we start, I'd like to give a shout out to Stringjoy for helping me get some strings for these reviews. I couldn't recommend them enough, and as you guys know, I change the strings out every single review, so really it's a very helpful thing. So thank you, Stringjoy. All right, so this is the PRS SE CE 24 Satin. Now this guitar did come out about 9 months ago, but PRS recently put out a newer version of this model called the Sandblasted, and it has the exact same build in regards to the electronics, the neck, all that stuff. The only difference is that that one has a swamp ash top on top of a mahogany body. So I figured this might be a good time to dive into this lesser expensive satin version just to see what it's all about. And if you watch this video, you can apply a lot of this information to that new Sandblasted guitar. Now let's talk about PRS SE CE 24 Satin, just so you have an idea of what that means. Now PRS obviously stands for Paul Reed Smith, and then you've got SE, which stands for Student Edition. Now you can think of that more as like the Squire version of a Fender, or an LTD version of an ESP, or Epiphone version of a Gibson. It's just basically like the budget tier for Paul Reed Smith, but of course they couldn't call it the PRS Budgie series or something like that. And then you've got the CE, which stands for Custom Electric Guitar, and it's actually one of the first guitars that Paul Reed Smith came out with, the CE model. Then 24 stands for the fact that this guitar has 24 frets. And lastly, satin would be the finish on this model, whereas the CE usually has a very gorgeous top. By removing the maple top and just carving the mahogany to a similar shape saves them a lot of money and saves you a lot of money, right? Now when it comes to the price, as far as I can tell, this is PRS's first foray into sub $500 guitars, and this one came in at about $499 to be exact. But to be honest with you, you can find these on Reverb for as low as $350 brand new out the door, depending on who's trying to offload them. Now I myself also got this guitar at a slight bit of a discount. I think it was around $425 or something like that, brand new of course. And that was not a deal or a promotional thing. That was just something I found on Reverb after reviewing my last Paul Reed Smith guitar, and I wanted to just see what this guitar was all about for $499, right? I've actually been reviewing a lot of budget guitars lately, and it's amazing to me just how across the spectrum they are, both in build quality and sound. I mean, I've played $800 budget guitars that have extra holes drilled in them, or $400 guitars that sound amazing. I played $600 guitars where some of the electronics aren't even hooked up. So I wanted to see what PRS was willing to put out for $500, because they have a pretty prestigious name that I wouldn't think would want to be marred by any of those quality control issues. Now I did review a PRS SE NF3, I think that's right, about a month or two ago, and that guitar was really cool. I love the way that that thing sounded and the way it played. So this was just something that I figured, hey, it's even less expensive than that. Let's see how it does. It's awesome that PRS included a brown canvas bag. I've been reviewing a few Epiphone guitars and a Guild guitar not too long ago that was around the same price point, 500, 600 bucks, something like that. And those just come in a cardboard box. So the fact that they threw in even a cheap gig bag is, I think, muy bueno. Now this gig bag is, yeah, it's pretty decent there. It's a brown canvas gig bag complete with the letters SE sewn on the front here over the pocket. But inside it's just a bare bones case. There's a bit of molded foam for the guitar to rest against, but I wish that there was a little bit more added protection maybe where the neck is, because this guitar does have an angled headstock. So the fact that it is going to just be resting on the headstock there, and it's not like a Fender where it sits flat, I do think that it's ripe for something bad to happen. So it would have been nice to have a little bit of a neck support pad in there. Now moving to the front of the bag here, we've got a nice big pocket. It's big enough for some sheet music or accessories like strings, picks, or beef jerky. There are a few goodies in here, or case candy if you will. There's a whammy bar and a few tools for adjusting the bridge and the truss rod. Now let's flip the bag over, and we do have some backpack style straps there, which is great for carrying it. And then of course there's also the normal carry handles. Overall, I'd give this gig bag a solid B+ in terms of gig bags. Now the general aesthetic of this guitar is of course the core model CE24, which is a gorgeous guitar. The shape of it is also the very familiar PRS shape as it's known. It's very classy looking, but it's also very functional. You've got your upper horn there with the strap button on it, and you've got your lower horn there so that you have access to the entire fretboard. It's a very nice design. PRS calls this a shallow violin carve, and you can see that it does have a little bit of a carve to it, but really it's so shallow, and with the finish being satin, if you're looking at this guitar from 10 or 15 feet away, it might just look like a flat slab. Since I know this is a budget model, then these matte finishes don't really bother me at all. Now, speaking of finishes, you can get this guitar in 3 different ones. This is the charcoal finish, but there's also a vintage cherry and a turquoise finish. Now, I chose charcoal over the other finishes because I like just the general dark theme of it. You've got the dark headstock there, you've got the dark rosewood fretboard, and then of course the body matches all of that. So it's a pretty neat look, but the vintage cherry also did look pretty cool. Now, as mentioned before, the body of this guitar is a mahogany slab, which differentiates it from the S2 and the core lines of the CE24 models in that those also have a mahogany body, but they have a maple cap, very similar construction to a Les Paul. And I also already mentioned the shallow violin carve. Now, you do still get the belly carve on the back, but also that is shallow as well. But one thing that is nice is that you've got all this access here to the fretboard, which is very similar to what you would get on the CE models, but one of the main differences that I could find is that on the CE model, this horn actually extends almost straight across to this horn, and the neck mounts real deep into the body here, whereas on this model, of course, you can see that there is a jut here for the neck to mount. I'd be curious to look at the proper CE model to see just how they did that, because I don't know why they didn't do that on this model, and the only thing I'm thinking is maybe with the maple cap, the body itself is just a little bit thicker, and they can route the neck to go underneath the pickup here, which is about where it mounts on the CE model. But until I have a spare $3,500 or so, I guess I'm just going to have to imagine that. Or maybe if one of you guys has that, you can leave it in the comments, and I will be delighted to read about that. Now, I would like to also point out that this body is actually 3 different cuts of mahogany that are glued together with no manner of symmetry at all in them. So you've got this 4-inch slab here, this 3-inch slab here, and then this like 6-inch slab. They're all sandwiched and glued together. And you can actually really see that when the light catches it because of the way that the wood grain is with this satin finish. Like you can see this is one right here, you can see this one here, I'm sure, and then this last one over here. If that bothers you, then that might be a problem, because I have a feeling all these $500 guitars are probably made with those kinds of scraps. I doubt that there's any out there that are solid 1-piece bodies, or maybe even 2. But you know what? It still looks okay, and that really shouldn't affect the playability too much. Now, PRS has outfitted all of the PRS SE CE guitars with a maple neck here, and I gotta be honest, this is one of the better necks that I've felt in a long time. Not just for a budget guitar, but also for many of the guitars that I've played. It just has a really nice smooth feel to it, almost like it's sanded down. Now, this headstock is joined to the neck here with a scarf joint, and it starts back here on the back side of the neck, just behind the nut, and then diagonally works its way up to about the 3rd fret, just underneath the fretboard. So it's a very shallow angle there, which gives it a lot of room for the bond to bite there. So I don't think you have to worry about this thing being too fragile. Now, PRS does define this neck profile as a wide, thin neck here, and I will draw it out, but it does actually seem to match that description. It basically looks like a really soft crescent there, but it does feel pretty decent in my hands here. And I actually like the way that it evolves as you get down here towards the body. Now, the fretboard here is made out of rosewood, and that is a very dark rosewood. It looks almost like ebony. I was surprised actually that it wasn't. That's how dark it looks. Really nice board on this guitar. Now, if you're curious about the measurements, for the nut here I get a 1.69 inches, and at the 1st fret I get a 0.83 inches. Moving down here to the 12th fret, I get a 0.91 inches, which means that this guitar does not have much of a thickness increase from the 1st fret almost all the way down to where it meets the body, about a 1/10 of an inch in total. But I did notice that PRS actually lists the official measurements of their guitars as if they could hit that accuracy on every single one of them, and this guitar was about 2/100ths bigger than what the actual PRS measurements are. Now, the radius on this fretboard measures in at about a 10-inch radius, which is just a little bit flatter than the old Fender 9.5-inch fretboards. Now, lastly, what I'd like to mention is that this guitar is a 25-inch scale, which puts it right about square in the middle between the longer Fender scale and the shorter Gibson scale. Now, I have not really played many PRSs. In fact, the last review I did of a PRS was the last time I played a PRS and the first time I played a PRS. So I was just getting used to the scale there, but I gotta admit, it's actually kind of nice just having that little bit more spacing between the frets, especially if you have big dumb fingers like I do. So I'm actually becoming a pretty big fan of this 25-inch scale. Now first things first, we've got these strap buttons here, same one on the bottom of the guitar as you find up here on the upper horn. These are similar to what you would find on the PRS core models, but they're not quite the same. However, I do think that these are pretty decent strap buttons, and it does look like you'd get a pretty decent bite on a regular strap. Then moving up from there, we get to our switch nut, which is pretty beefy looking, not too worried about that. Now moving up from there, we get to the patented PRS trem system. Now I've never really been a tremolo guy myself, but I can tell you from all the research I've done on this system, everybody seems to have very nice things to say about the PRS trem. Regardless of what they think of the guitars themselves or playing a PRS guitar, it seemed like there were very few negative comments on this actual system. When Paul Reed Smith came up with this system, he took the Fender system that was popular at the time and added what he saw were some much needed improvements. Things like the shoulders here that run along the side to keep all the saddles in line there. Additionally, for each saddle, he put a radial curve in where the string crosses over. That way, whenever you're bending forward or even if you're pulling back, the string never rests against a hard edge, which might not be a problem for some of these unwound strings, but these wound strings could have a tendency to maybe get caught on some of those sharper corners. I think the best thing that he did though is what he calls his knife blade edge there on the bridge. So what it is basically the bridge plate tapers into a more or less knife edge, which rests against these notched screws. So every time you do use the trem system, it just wants to return to a familiar point where it just is more natural to sit at, as opposed to the old systems, which might just be a bar screw going through there, and you can have little shifts in where the bridge plate rests against those screws. So overall, it's a nice system. It's very highly regarded. Interestingly enough, Fender implemented some of these changes in their trem systems just a few years after PRS came out with their design. Another nice thing is the way the whammy bar sits inside the bridge here. So you've got what looks like a plastic sleeve inside the whammy bar holder, and you can notice that our whammy bar is unthreaded. Well, that just sits inside as you would expect, and then there's actually a little screw here that you can tighten, which would tighten the sleeve or loosen it, and then that would dictate how much this is a free swinging bar or not. Pretty cool system. And when we flip the guitar over and look in the back cavity here, well, you can see that you've got your basic spring claw there that's driven into the body, 4 springs on it, which then go to a really nice beefy steel block. Pretty cool there. Now moving up from the bridge, we get to our frets here. Now this guitar has medium jumbo frets, and of course it's got 24 of them, which is why it's called the CE24. These frets feel pretty much like what you would find on any Gibson guitar. They're almost identical in measurement. And moving up from there, we get to our truss rod. Now this is a dual action truss rod, so you can adjust for forward bow or back bow as necessary. And then we move on up to our tuners. Now these are PRS tuners. They're actually pretty nice, especially on a budget guitar. In case you're wondering, these ones measure in at an 18:1 tuning ratio, which is awesome for some fine-tune adjustment. And then just down from there, we get lastly to our metal neck plate there, which obviously has the screws going through it that connect the neck to the body. For the electronics, we've actually got a system that's identical to the much more expensive, bigger brother of the PRS line, which would be the Core CE24. And what I mean by that is you've got a master volume pot and a master tone pot, but this is not just a normal tone pot. This one actually has a coil tap in it. So if I pull it, the pickups are now tapped. The unfortunate thing with this system is that once you pull it, everything's tapped or everything's not tapped. And you know where that might be a bummer is, say you want to have a bright bridge pickup, but you want to just tap the neck pickup to maybe lower some of the warmth so it doesn't wash out the brightness, and just giving it probably a terrible example. Well, unfortunately, you don't really have that ability. Once you pull it, you're either tapped or untapped, regardless of what position your selector is in. Now, the pickups that PRS put in here are the PRS 8515S pickups. PRS has said that these pickups are constructed identically to their USA-made counterpart 8515 pickups, but from all the information that I've gathered online, it does seem like a lot of people that own both these guitars and side by side them say they actually don't sound too similar. But on a positive note, some people actually preferred the 8515S pickups over the regular 8515 pickups. So really it's all just going to be a preference thing, and since I don't really play PRS guitars, I have no frame of reference anyway, so I'm excited to try them out. Now, being that these are supposedly identical to the USA counterpart, technically, I guess they should be Alnico 2 magnets, but it does seem like a lot of people are skeptical of that claim, and some people say, no, they're actually Alnico 5 magnets, which means they're not identical to the USA counterpart, so really the jury is out on that one. Now let's get into the pretty extensive pickup readings on these, because I'm going to include the tap in there as well. So for untapped, we'll start with the bridge. We get a 7.86. Moving on to the neck there, we get a 7.23. And lastly, in the middle there, we get a 3.79. Now reading just the bridge tapped, I'm now reading a 5.40. And if I move to the neck, which would now be tapped also, that would get a 4.46. And then lastly, if I move to the middle, where both pickups are now tapped, the reading that I'm going to get there is a 2.45, which is pretty low. Now, one thing I think would have added a little bit more versatility to this guitar would have been treating these pickups with a coil split as opposed to a coil tap. Now, if you do need a little bit of a refresher, well, a coil split is effectively like shutting off one of these coils here and treating the humbucker like a single coil, so you get more of that jangly sound like you would find on a Fender Strat or a Fender Telecaster. Whereas a coil tap is more of like drawing off a line from these pickups and effectively reducing its output. Now, I've never really found that system to be much of a benefit for me, but I'm sure somewhere out there somebody's using it quite effectively, and maybe they can leave a comment below about how a coil tap benefits them. But personally, I've never found the system to be too helpful for what I play. Now let's flip this guitar over and look inside of the back cavity here. So we've got two pots in there. Looks like they're 500K Alpha brand pots. And there's one 33 nanofarad Mylar cap in there. So it's a pretty simple system. There's really not a lot going on in there. Now for the other materials, we'll start again at the bottom. We'll work our way all the way up to the top and then flip the guitar over as necessary. Now it is a small thing there, but we do have a little bit of a felt bumper between the strap button and the body. Same with on the upper horn, you've got that same sort of felt bumper. And moving up from there, we get to our black switch tip there. It's just a general plastic. And moving up from there, we get to our control knobs. Now these are black speed knobs with the white lettering on the inside there. They don't say tone or volume, of course, but they are in the popular positions for where those controls would be, with the volume up closer to the pickups. And then we get to our whammy bar here. You can see that we've got a black tip on that, also plastic. Then we've got our black pickup rings, again, plastic. And then moving up from there, we get to our fretboard inlays. Now, of course, these are the traditional PRS burbs. Now I'm going to do a short history on each one of these. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. But I do think it's interesting that the 24th fret is does have a bird, but it actually looks more of just like a blob or somebody's chewing gum, but I guess it's supposed to be like a baby owl. I don't know, there's lists of what these birds are, and maybe there's a meaning for each one on each fret. I have no idea. Flipping the guitar on its side here, you can see that we've got some side dot markers, which is also very helpful. Then we get up here to the patented PRS nut. They don't tell you what it's made out of, just that it's a patented PRS nut, but my previous PRS review also had the patented PRS nut, and it seemed fine for what I do. Then you get to the truss rod cover, which is a single black ply truss rod cover that does say CE on it, in case you forgot what you're playing. And then we get to our silk screened PRS or Paul Reed Smith SE logo there, which is pretty nice and stylish. I've always thought that was a pretty classy logo. Flipping the guitar over, we've got a couple plates here for the bridge cavity and also for the control cavity there. I've actually spent an extended period of time playing this guitar, and I decided I wanted to really get into this thing and just see if maybe I could picture myself buying a PRS CE 24. And I know that obviously this is not a $3,000 guitar. I know that people that have those guitars are thinking, well, if you like this guitar, wait till you actually play a real one. And that's kind of what I wanted to see, was just if more the style of it, the comfort of it. But I have to say that after playing it for a few weeks, I do love it. I do think the neck is great. I do think that the sound is great, which we'll do the sound test after this. I actually like the thinness of the body here, and even this like thin, shallow violin top, as they call it. You know, I don't really need all the ornate carving. That's nice stuff. I prefer that on my SGs. I don't really need that on my other guitars. But joking aside, yeah, I think it's fine on this guitar with just the satin finish. It does have a really nice feel to it, but the one thing I do want to say is while the neck feels great, there is a little bit of work that could be done on these fret ends. And I've only encountered this, believe it or not, one other time, and that was on a Rickenbacker guitar that had the same problem, where the frets just hung off a little bit too far on the underside of the fretting hand there. So It's not enough where you're ever going to catch your skin on it and bleed or anything like that, but they're just very prevalent, and I feel them a lot when I'm sliding my hand up and down the neck. And I don't think I have a really tight grip on the neck. I mean, I've been playing guitar enough to know that, you know, you need to actually play a little loosely sometimes to get what you're going for. But even on a loose stance, I actually feel the frets like rubbing here on my hand, and that's just not a feel that I like. So after this review sometime, I'm gonna fix those up. I'll put on the laundry list of a lot of guitar related things that I need to do, and we'll see if I actually ever get to them. But the actual feel of it, I love the way that it sits in your lap. I like that, you know, your knee is sitting between the two pickups. That's always a nice thing, so that you can strum freely without worrying about hitting those. The 25-inch scale, while being a little bit longer than the Gibson, isn't so far enough that I'm out of my comfort zone. Like you should see when I play a Telecaster or a Stratocaster or something, it's like I've never played guitar before, but this is something I can definitely get used to. Now this guitar also has a really nice weight balance to it, and that's something I really like. And I know that light guitars are all the rage right now, but this thing's not too bad. It comes in at almost a perfect 7 pounds, 7.01 pounds to be exact, which is actually a really good balance here. Now let's do the neck dive test, but I have a feeling this guitar is engineered to not have much neck dive at all. Now this is a generic 2-inch Couch brand strap, which I think represents probably what most people have at home. In case you ever want to waddle back and forth like this, you don't really got to worry about your guitar. Yeah, just what I thought. There's no way Paul Reed Smith was ever going to let this guitar have any neck dive. All right, now we'll do the sound test, and I'll run through a couple different combinations of pickup selection, obviously knob placement, and maybe even some coil tapping as necessary. And I'll put everything on the side here in a nice pretty graph so you can see exactly what I'm doing there. But if you do have any questions about it, please leave comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. But I try to make it as clear as possible, because one of my biggest pet peeves when I'm watching a review is I don't know how driven the guitar is. Are we playing at 5? Are we playing at 10? So if those graphs are helpful to you, let me know in the comments below, because they actually take quite a bit of time to make. And so if they're not helpful, I'd like to devote my energy to maybe making something that's a little better for you guys to see just exactly what settings I'm using the guitar at. So I played this guitar a lot, like I said, and I have to admit, this is probably one of my favorite budget guitars that I've played. You get an awesome feature set, you get some really nice pickups. They're not my favorite pickups, but they certainly would do the trick, and they're better than a lot of other $500 guitar pickups that I played before. Pretty simple control system, but sometimes that's really all that you need. I'd say if it didn't have these fret issues that I have on the side here, then this guitar would probably be like right up there at the top. I mean, it's definitely already on the short list of recommended $500 guitars. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm always eager to hear those, and if I have anything relevant to say, I always respond. Please click the subscribe button if you want to see more content like this, and maybe consider liking the video if you actually did like it. Thanks again to Stringjoy for helping me out. All right, guys, I will talk to you next time.